This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Tales From The Crypt podcast. Hi, it's Alan, and welcome to another episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. Gil is on location today with the person we're going to be talking to, Elliot Silverstein. We first met Elliot on Tales From The Crypt. Elliot directed 4 episodes, including one of the series' best, The Reluctant Vampire, starring Malcolm MacDowell as a vampire who works as a night watchman in a blood bank so he doesn't have to kill people. Elliot is a first-rate director. He's also a living piece of film and TV history. While back east in New York in the 1950s and 60s, he helped invent television directing. When he came west to LA, his first feature film, Ballou, won 4 Academy Awards for adapted screenplay, score, editing, and actor Lee Marvin. He also directed A Man Called Horse, starring Richard Harris, another really remarkable movie. The history part kicks in with Elliot's involvement with the DGA, the Directors Guild of America. As you'll hear, Elliot's a labor guy through and through. He's also a creative rights guy through and through. The only reason any director has a director's cut or final cut is because of Elliot's hard work. There's one more thing you should know about Elliot going in the door. He's 95 years old and still kicking hard. Here's Elliot. You started out, you wanted to be an actor originally. You went to Boston College to be an actor. And then it was when you went to the Yale School of Drama that you suddenly focused on directing, yeah?
Well, not that fine a line from one to the other.
Why acting?
Should I ask all the actors why acting?
Well, if we had all the actors here, we would, but we have the one actor that we want to talk to right here.
That's one way of telling a story. It's probably the most powerful way, except for perhaps a Shakespearean tragedy.
You've worked with thousands of actors over the course of your career. Did you ever, as you were directing any of them, wish that you could switch places with them?
One or two, not really a lot.
Let me put it this way. Were there any parts that somehow you thought, hey, I could do this better than that schmo?
I don't think of it that way. I never really, I'm not in competition with them. They have their own madness to deal with, and all I want is get them to do it on time and as written, without an argument.
You ended up in TV really early on. You were a production assistant on Omnibus.
Right.
And you eventually got a directing assignment while you were still at Omnibus. Was that how directing began for you?
I left a teaching job at Brandeis University to come up into the city because somebody there knew somebody at the staff of the program. They gave me a chance to pick up notes and deliver things. Gradually, somebody had a problem with a program which was involved with the ancient Greek tragedians. And they were about the conference table, and they were about to break up the meeting for the day. And somebody said, "Is that it?" And I said, "No, it's not it." "Oh, who are you?" I was the guy that brushed off the table afterwards. I said, "Well, you've got Corinthian columns there, and they didn't have Corinthian columns in that there. Like, who the hell was this guy?" So they asked me for more, and I gave them a little history of scene design, and they tore up that version of it and redid it a little bit. And I was a golden boy after that.
Having worked with you, you have such a clear sense of how to tell every story I've ever worked on with you. You see the whole. I feel like you see the finished show inside your head as you go to do it. Yeah,
pretty much.
Okay. When did that start?
When I was a baby.
Oh dear. Okay. All right.
I got into that because it was the only way that a man who was relatively short compared to leading men could get a job. And so I got a job And then they saw there were some other things I could do. There were some waste paper baskets that needed to be emptied. And from then on, I got some breaks.
From the first time that you took up the mantle of director, you had a clear visual approach, an approach to the storytelling where you saw the whole thing in your head from the get-go.
Not quite the whole thing, but much of it. That should have discouraged me right away. What I was seeing was not pleasing me a lot, but it was the stepping stone that I had to utilize in order to get to the next step. And then the next one was perhaps prophetic. I was allowed to direct a commercial for the Ford Foundation. The next thing I know, I was asked to direct a Christmas show that is not really directed because it already had a director, a wonderful guy named Seymour Robbie, but he didn't have the literary background to understand what was going on in this project, the original title of which was The Second Shepherd's Play. It's a very famous spot in development history.
One of the medieval mystery plays.
So I was allowed to go into the control room, and Seymour and I worked out the choreography, the visual choreography. And that was a very great hit. Variety gave it a very good review. And I felt very good about that. And then I started up from there little pieces to let me do the camera work also.
Mm-hmm.
And
that was in New York, or?
That was in New York, yes.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that perhaps in a way, because of the nature of how TV was then, in terms of how you had, because were you shooting things live and then cutting live?
Yes.
Okay. So in terms of just the muscle memory that you develop in a TV control room, that kind of directing where it's to that camera, to that camera, to that camera, where it really is, you will benefit from walking in the door, having a sense of where which camera you should be, thinking through.
Well, Seymour was a great help and very patient, helping me do that, because that was a crazy threshold to cross.
I'm sure.
The actors and the producer and the network and then everybody else, and then finally to get down to my problem. And I never learned how to handle that. I never learned how to handle the executive interference. Never did. I mean,
yeah.
I'll just say that by the time he got to Tales from the Crypt, he handled the management pretty well. Management, I would say he handled the management pretty well.
What does that reading connote?
It means you handled the management, meaning me, pretty well when we did Tales.
Say something about that. Yeah. People in charge of many of the network shows at that time were not trained on any level. Now, Gil knew his beans. I mean, he knew what I would say, X, Y, and Z. He knew what the hell I was talking about, and maybe even have a comment that was worth listening to. But in many cases, there was somebody climbing the corporate ladder, and it was viewed as a successful event if he could get a renewal of a contract, because he maybe renewed a show or pointed out this and that and the other thing, and the level higher than that took notice of the fact that he made a comment. I ran into trouble with that kind of thing, as many directors do, if they made the wrong move, and I made plenty of wrong moves. There was a guy who was a head of public relations for one of the companies, and he was asked to produce a show. Now, public relations and production are about as far as you could want to get. One is to tell everybody what's happening, and the other is not to tell them until you have to. He used to call him Mumbles. But for a public relations guy,
they mumbles.
I mumbled. You couldn't understand what the hell he was talking about. But that was the worst part of it. The worst part of it is the distinctive difference between tell them what they want to know and withhold that to keep them around. The big difference. And he was giving all the information about the whodunit to the audience, despite my groans of pain and efforts to educate him. He had the confidence of the management, and I only had the confidence of 2,500 years of theatrical history, which didn't matter much to him.
Yeah.
So there was no way for me to hold on to any kind of suspense. So that was a trick which I had to utilize later on, which was make something out of nothing. And it involved having the other actors look at each other with aplomb, astonishment. What is he doing to us? And the audience, being trained in a different way, thought that meant that they didn't know who did it. So it somehow escaped the notice of a lot of people, but it was an embarrassment. He later, of course, was promoted.
Like failing upwards.
That's the button on the story. He, of course, was promoted.
Yes. That's right, yeah.
You were never, ever a corporate guy.
Generally speaking, you're right. My goal would be measured in ways other than serving the corporate needs of the network. I imagine myself being the first audience.
You have a long history with the Directors Guild of America as really doing all kinds of things. Creative rights was, I mean, you were one of the first people that I think really talk about it. The whole idea of a director's cut, really, that comes from you, doesn't it?
Yeah, yes, it does. I never really enjoyed those fights. I had the good fortune of working with a number of really excellent producers, one of them sitting next to me, another one being like Sam Spiegel, who's out here.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah,
wow, okay.
Oh, him.
That's good company to be in. Oh.
Well, a good producer knows what you are trying to do, not trying to enforce his views of what should be done on you. That becomes useless. And it was all an accident of the way film work began, because as you probably know, it began with people doing this kind of little trick thing with the kids used to call a kaleidoscope and things of that nature. And then somebody came along and said, "Hey, wouldn't it be good if we could sell this?" Yes, we'll sell it. All right, fine. Well, that was so good, we'll need more than that. Well, I can't do more than that. Well, we'll have the guy come in and help you produce it. We'll call him a producer. So he produced it. And then the producer got too much to handle because it got so popular. So we'll have an executive producer. And then eventually it went up the line till it became de rigueur. And the people who superseded or stood on the shoulders, I say, of the producer, instead of being a help, they tried to get in on the process. And having different goals. One was the show, and the other one was the ratings, because they're very often different, as you undoubtedly know. And it was gradually the system grew stronger and easier to understand from a corporate point of view, and we're stuck with that now.
Before we abandon your early years of TV, you, among the shows that you did, you've got 4 Twilight Zones to your credit.
4, yeah, something like 3 or 4, yeah.
4. I can tell you 4.
Okay.
According to the IMDb Pro.
Okay.
I trust them because I pay them.
Okay.
You have 4. There were 4. You wrote 2, I think at least 2 of your episodes, maybe 3, were Rod Serling scripts, and one was a Richard Matheson. The other one was a Richard Matheson script.
I didn't write them.
No, but what I'm saying, Rod Serling wrote 3 of your scripts, and Richard Matheson, another terrific writer,
it's possible,
wrote another of your Twilight Zone episodes. So you had, really, you had good scripts to work with.
Yeah. Well, that's the beginning of everything. So that one respect, writers are correct. If they're the ones that start the process, they start with the germ, and the germ gets more infectious.
It's also, it seems to me, an indication with people like Matheson and Serling that they would trust their material.
That's my next question.
Yeah, since they probably had the pick of the litter to say, okay, I want this fellow or this gal to direct my work, that they consistently went back and forth to Elliot.
What was the experience of directing? Because not only was Rod Serling the writer, he was a producer on the show, so he's your boss.
He never stepped forward.
Right. So he let you do your work.
It was well put together. So the better the script was put together, the easier it was to mount it.
But most importantly, he trusted you to do your work.
Well, I suppose did he trust me? I don't know if he trusted me.
Hey, if a minimal of interference.
I guess maybe it does come down to trust.
To me, it always comes down to trust. I mean,
Gosh.
I always say to people, if I can't trust you, then there's no sense in you trying to work for me. I can't do anything about that. So if you've lost trust, to me, you've lost everything. And I think these guys in the early stages of television, even more so.
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, they were inventing the medium and how the medium was going to look and feel in play, how it would tell stories.
But when you're talking about the beginning, as to when these rules were established, you got to realize it was a desert. There was no half-hour shows or even 15-minute shows. They just crept onto the screen with great hope, and eventually established a methodology.
Yeah.
And that's when the escalation I described a moment ago was started. Where you had one producer did one show, and then he got so good, he had two or three, and he had to do them in the course of a day or a week. He needed help, so he got some others, and then they were so popular, they got hungry, and they had to have assistance. So then it moved up till finally it got to the corporate bigwigs, who are less and less now. Occasionally, now it's corporations that are the authors. Nobody else is.
No, again, just for perspective purposes, I mean, if you think about that, this was all happening in New York. Playwrights were very popular because they had delivered for stage, and so they were the obvious choice to go to for some of the writers. And it was developing and growing from there. The Playhouse 90s and all those theater pieces that they did on television were sort of the starting point for television and what happened when it went out to the West Coast.
Indeed. At what point did you move from New York to Los Angeles, Elliot?
At what point?
Yeah.
Well, there was a point where shows were moving from New York to Los Angeles.
Right.
I mean, I wasn't dragged along with them, but eventually there was, I guess, some reason, I don't forget what they were. I guess there was less opportunities in New York then. And so I went out to California, the same people, except it was located in California, and the big mockers, the big shots did not want to move to Los Angeles, so they stayed in New York.
Right.
And gave their godlike instructions over the telephone.
Yeah, indeed they did. You were born in Boston. You were a complete East Coast person.
Yes.
Did you have a particular feeling about Los Angeles before moving out here?
No, I mean, it's like buying a house to me. It's not all that important. It's the people in it that interest. I didn't really care very much.
So being in Los Angeles was neither here nor there to you compared to being in New York?
I had no choice. I went where the money was.
Okay, cool. Did you enjoy living in Los Angeles versus living in New York?
Nobody enjoys living in Los Angeles.
I think this is where we play the Neil Diamond song.
Okay. Okay. All right. All right. All right. We'll come back to that. Was LA good to you? What once you made the move, was LA good to you career wise?
Everybody that I know or I get to know has been good to me. And then they weren't so good to me.
Yeah, well, hey man, that's LA for you. You know, it sets you up and then boy, does it kick you in the nuts. Boy, boy, does it.
Fear is king. See, that's the problem. Fear is king. The producers are so afraid of moving out of the traditional norm into something flashier. Be all right if it worked, and the doing of it didn't matter as much as the rating did. And I suppose there's some logic to that, but that a lot of people it doesn't affect. They just go ahead and do what seems to be the right thing to do in telling the story. A friend of mine, Frank Pearson, was the story editor for Avatar Will Travel. They had a difficult time knowing what to do with the story. This was a story, a Western, and the script that I was asked to try to direct was story editor was Frank Pearson.
Yeah.
And the story began with a little kid trying to take a bath, being given a bath, and he escapes from the bathtub.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. I got you.
The opening shots. And nobody could really make it work happily because they refused to deal with the one fact that kids at a certain age no longer bathe naked. The mothers usually wrap a towel around them or something. And Frank was a fan of mine, other things that I had done there. So I was asked to do that. And I said, it's very easy. Get back when the kid leaves the tub, jump way back as far as you can get back so nobody can tell whether he's bare ass or not. And then I love to give arguments to the network people when they haven't got a leg to stand on. How could they say he was naked? How do you know? It's so far back. So that worked. And the producers liked that very much. And then somebody saw the logic behind my trying to blindfold the network people. So I was given other assignments.
You also did Route 66, a couple of episodes of that.
I did.
I
did one that I wrote too. I came out of my apartment in New York on 65th Street, and a guy was trying to break open the lock on my car. I said, "Aha, a show!" across the street, and I got a hold of him. How it begins. We ran up 58th Street, one after the other. And you'll see a whole show right here. And as we were running, I was chasing them. Then I looked behind me, and there were two guys there, heavyweights, the cops. They were chasing me. I was chasing the thief over on 58th Street, on 59th Street, subway, down.
Wow.
We all chased each other down there. Finally, along the subway, we got to the end of the tracks. And that was it. And the guy held up his arms, and he was arrested. And the cops were good guys. They said, "What are you doing?" Well, he couldn't speak. I said, "Just tell the guys why you did that." He said, "I got kids and they're hungry." I'll never forget that. So I looked at the cops and I said, "What are we going to do?" He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I don't want to do anything but give them a loaf of bread." And they said, "All right." So we a little more talking, and it turned out there was a national hospital in Lexington, Kentucky, I think, for dope addicts. Turned out this guy was a dope addict, and he was buying. Research turned out he was buying food or stealing food for his family. So we established that, and the two cops and I did things that neither one of us was supposed to do. We agreed that this guy should not go to jail, but then he would go to the hospital and see if they can break the habit. And that's what he did. And the cops, God bless them, they stood with him. This is another story. They stood with him in a hotel all night long, make sure he didn't get drunk again. And they escorted him to the train and put him on the train and made sure he got off at the hotel,
The hospital.
the address for the hospital. So the three of us, there's two cops and I, saved that guy's life and maybe his family too. And the cops, one of them said something, I can't recall exactly what it was, but he said something to the effect that he really served the city well that day.
Indeed.
They made a citizen.
Indeed.
Yeah.
That was
Made a difference.
Made a difference.
Made a big difference.
Instead of just locking him up and throwing away the kid.
The leap to feature films.
Yeah, feature films.
Yeah. How you saw that as an advancement?
Yeah, I'm questioning the use of the word advancement. The principles are generally the same, as you undoubtedly know. They're interrupted at intervals by using them as sales ploys.
Mm-hmm.
But the basic stuff is the same. Maybe larger, fancier, louder, softer, this way, that way. But essentially the rules are somewhat the same, I think. And
why did you decide to do that piece of material, Cat Ballou? What was it about that piece of material?
It was decided for me. I got a call, let me see, what was it? Of the same guy, God bless him, Frank Pearson, who recalled the experience that he had at the previous show I mentioned.
On Have Gun Will Travel.
Yeah, and they were having trouble with the script, the concept of it. Where was it going to go? Because the one group of the staff wanted to make a whodunit, another one wanted to make an adventure story. They couldn't quite categorize it. So Frank asked, I guess in desperation, would I come in to talk to them? I said, yes, sure. No, would I ever? Sure, feature film, absolutely. So I went in, and there was the producer, who was not Gil's kind of producer. This guy was a nervous wreck and a promoter. He wasn't a filmmaker.
Yeah.
He attached himself to films and was a promoter. And they gave me the final test. What would, that's the story of a girl whose life was ruined by people who hated her father and shot and killed her father, and she became the two-gun mistress of the West. And Jane Fonda was in it, was already cast. And I was asked a number of questions, like, what would you do if they tied her to the railroad tracks? And I said, I don't think that'd be very funny, because it just isn't real. You knew that wasn't going to happen. They weren't going to put Jane Fonda on the railroad track with a locomotive bearing down on it. She had to get out of it. And if you have to get out of the trap before it's even sprung, it doesn't really work too well. So they asked questions like that and a couple of other things. And then they dismissed me, and apparently I said some things that they liked to hear, and they called me back in. And then that started down the track to Misery.
The Misery.
And Harold Heck, Lord Govern, bless him for giving me that shot, was a nervous wreck.
Oh, it's Harold Hecht who you're talking about as the nervous wreck producer.
Building trembled. He couldn't believe it. I mean, I had to show fingernails to make sure that my hands were made up properly, things like that. And I had to bite my lip because this was, what I call it, it's so insane. Here I was, the director of a major motion picture for a major company, and I had to answer questions about would it show a man's hand quivering. But at any rate, we got through with that, and then he chased me on almost every single trip down the line. And I had some crazy ones that I was doing. Oh, where is she? Where is she? Which way is she looking? Which way? I said, she's looking where she's supposed to look, Harold. Oh, yeah, that's simple. Stuff like that.
Lee Marvin gave you an amazing performance as twin brothers Kid Shalene and the villain Tim Strawn.
Well, that was an interesting experience because Lee was used to playing the heavyweight or the hero gun. And the company had tried everybody, the superstars all the way down the line, or I should say up the line, but that's what they were involved with. And there was a conference in the main office. The piece was ready to be canceled because he couldn't satisfy Columbia with a star. And there was a big silence, a deadly silence before everybody throws in the hat. And I said, what about Lee Marvin? Huh? I said, you see him on the, he did this, he came off the horse like he didn't know how to ride. Oh, yeah. And Mike Frankovich, God bless him, was the head of production at Columbia. He said, well, let's try him. They got him. He got the script. And Harold was quivering. He didn't know whether that was a good sign or that was the end of it.
It's quivering.
It was a good sign because Lee went around town reading from the script, funny stuff. And there was some funny stuff in the script.
I remember seeing that film as a kid and just loving it. It's a fun movie from start to finish. It's great fun.
It was not fun for me, I gotta tell you.
Well, hey,
it rarely is.
I knew what was funny, but I constantly had to look over my shoulder because Harold was there without a sense of humor, judging whether it was funny or not. As long as I got through on time, that was his main, so he could get on to the next project before I killed it.
Aside from Harold Hecht, what else caused you agita?
I don't mean to cast any aspersions.
Oh, no. Hey, look, but truth is truth. And, some people are good producers and some people are not good producers and they make working together horrible.
His name was on some very great films. So
yeah. Hey, but that doesn't mean he was easy to work with. It's just, we're just telling, hey, we're not saying he's a horrible human being. We're saying he was not the easiest person to work with.
That's okay too.
Yeah, and he might have had better times when he was easy to work with and times when he was harder to work with. That might be part of his story too.
Well, he had everything to be afraid of. Here was a director, first feature film. The budget was low. The issue was huge. Whether Harold Hecht would ever live to make another movie. Frank Pearson, thank you.
Yeah.
He came up to the office with me. His shoulders were slumped, and he was very worried that the first viewing of a cut was not successful, or didn't seem to be successful, till somebody in that group started to laugh, and then all the executives started to laugh. That's the way it works. You got to get an executive in the audience whenever you do a movie. At any rate, he couldn't believe that it was working out so well. Neither could I, frankly.
Our experience making a project doesn't reflect the audience's experience of the project.
Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right.
It's just how it is.
And rarely do they even know what is going on day to day.
Amen.
In terms of how it's accomplished.
Amen.
No idea. It was
what we're going to get. And the first job that I had as a director was to let them know it's okay to laugh at this one. It's okay. Yeah. This is not a real Western. They're supposed to be funny. You can laugh. Fine. If you don't find a laugh, I'll kill you. But so they laughed.
Yeah. Were you expecting the critical response, including the Academy Awards?
No. Matter of fact, I had that meeting I talked to you about with Frank Pearson. We were both very nervous now, of course, because we didn't know how it was going to be received by the executives. And I remember saying to Frank, look, we finished the first movie that we did. That's the hardest part, is getting that first assignment. We brought it in fairly well on time. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, and then the door opened, in came the rewards. Hey! So we came close to the guillotine.
That's sort of like Mel Brooks's story about Blazing Saddles. Very similar. He didn't know what he had. He went to a screening and thought it was awful, and people started laughing, and the rest is really history. But oftentimes, especially with comedy, you don't know. It's so subjective and it's so individual.
Oh boy.
That you don't know if it's going to appeal to as many people as it needs to appeal to. The
success of Cat Ballou, it was commercially and critically, and you get the awards. How did the town approach you afterward?
They all wanted me to make another comedy western, which I didn't want to do.
Shockingly.
I was a kid from Boston. It was enough. One was enough.
The next feature you did was called The Happening.
That's right.
And that is definitely not a Western.
No, it was definitely not a Western. Had some good things in it, but it just didn't glue together. I didn't glue it right.
Why do you think it did not get glued right?
Because I saw it incorrectly as the opportunity for a number of set comic pieces, instead of looking for some kind of through line, dramatic line.
Yeah.
And the result was, if you took one of those pieces out and looked at it separately, it might work. But put them all together and say, all right, what about now? How about now? Let's have another one. No, that one, so we just saw that one, So there's a couple of good things in it. But it weren't enough.
Is The Man Called Horse a Western?
You say, was it a Western?
Yeah.
Only in the sense that it had horses and Indians.
Yeah.
That piece, that's an interesting example. I was asked to come in and look at this script, like 210 pages long, really
Wow.
long piece. It had numerous historical pieces in it that attracted me because somebody wanted to do it right. That made me pay closer attention. And I got that assignment. There was some politics in the background that got me that assignment. It was an opportunity to be truthful. Just an opportunity. I couldn't go all the way because some of it was a horror story. It was, so far as I could make it, truthful, musically truthful. The orchestrations were as close as we could get. The wardrobe was as close as we could get. No event took place. The Sioux Indians from Lakota were on the show, almost all of them. I didn't let anybody who was not an Indian be a member of the tribe. So they meant a lot of phonies were sent back. So when they started to react, some of them could speak English, some of them couldn't. Those that could got excited because they remember their fathers had heard of this tune, of that thing, and they'd forgotten what it was the first time that they'd remembered. So we tried to be as historically accurate as it could be while not making a historical document. I was really overwhelmed as I got closer to it to see what these people thought about reality. They were not the savages. They were just people defending their homes, but they didn't have enough to do it with. The white men had more and bigger and louder. And so they made me a member of the tribe, among other things. How about that? Yeah. That's my Indian name.
Say it one more time. That it's beautiful. It's fantastic. I'm so envious you have one.
The dog, was something or other. I've forgotten what it was. Holy dog is that kind of thing.
I never knew this. I wish you would have told us this when we were doing Tales. I could have come to the set and said whatever
It
you
would have been
just
on your chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You would have said that on the back of your chair. Yeah.
Oh, that was a tough one. That was perhaps for a strange reason, one of the toughest assignments I've ever had in my life. A damn near sent me to the hospital in the middle of shooting. Matter of fact, I did collapse at one point. I remember exactly the point it was. And the assistant called the producer over. And this tells you what kind of a producer this was. There are producers who are concerned about everything, make sure that everything is right and peaceful. So this guy just wanted to please Gordon Stolberg, who was the newly installed head of the company that made the movie. He cared more about the fact that he had a star agreed to do a movie early in his calendar. And that meant that star could walk over everything. And it wouldn't stop him. And I would not allow that. I mean, I offered to quit. And it scared the hell out of him. And I realized I had the upper hand because he couldn't afford to have that kind of fracture a couple of weeks into shooting. So I played that horn as long as I could. And the result of it was when it was all over and the audits were coming in, he crossed me. I was standing on the set doing some other work, and all he wanted was, "Where's Richard?" Didn't even say hello. No, he wanted to see Richard Harris, who was his here.
Sounds like Joel Silver.
Huh? He what?
It's a producer out of the Joel Silver handbook. He just comes to see his star, man. Where's my star? Get out of my way. You're the director. I'm not here to see you.
It was pretty much what it was.
Wow.
But I loved making that movie because it was the first time in probably 300 or 400 years that the ceremony that we did there was thoroughly researched and down to what was shown was historically accurate. It would stand up to study. Anyway, I got reports for it afterwards that some scholars used it to back up, to show to their classes. That was more important to me almost than anything else. The key sequence of the movie, the piercing of the chest with arrows and hanging the recipient up on a high wire, gave me a chance to get even with Richard Harris and something. We left him up there for lunch.
That'll teach him.
Only for lunch? Oh, shit.
It could have been longer, but I would have lost the picture. They would have sent somebody else to cut him down. Worked out okay. But that did my heart good to see the old Indians that we had there singing the song. Some of them were 85, 90 years old. And one of them said that was the first time he'd heard his colleagues singing that song since his grandfather died.
Wow.
And it made me feel very good. And they made me a member of the tribe at the end of that. It was the first time that music in toto had, to my knowledge, and to the knowledge of a historian, Clyde Dollar, who was a white man who was working as a historian in the Indian tribe in South Dakota. And anything he knew about it, he just knew everything about it. But he was thrilled to hear that. He thought, "Oh, so many people are going to hear that music." That meant more to me, that there was a piece of real, instead of reading dull stuff out of a history book. You remember a sequence in the movie, this sequence where Richard Harris had the bones thrust to his chest?
Yeah.
That was just an understatement. What actually happened was, after the man was hoisted up with his bones through his chest and left there until he was unconscious, and they cut him down, they let him lie there. Then do you think that was enough for the Sioux? No. They dragged him behind a horse until he passed out again. Think that was enough? No, it was not. They had to do other things to him until he could just barely walk. And who was behind all this? The women. unless a man could go through all that and live to tell the story, they weren't interested. And so we couldn't show all that because people would have fainted. As it was, some people took that sequence very, very tough to where we was hoisted up. There were women that were screeching and a couple of people passed out, but it was understated.
This prepared you so perfectly to do Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah. The only argument the Indian experts had and all the museums that met and sent representatives was the fact that Richard Harris wore a band, like a headband, which was unknown to the Indians at that time, but his hair would drop down over his eyes. He didn't have that. And he demonstrated that's what he would look like unless I let him have that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, all right. It's the only thing I was asked to compromise, and I didn't. So as far as I know, and it's still run in front of historical scenes, history classes, just for that scene.
When did your relationship with Dick Donner start?
It's blurred in the history of time, but I believe it was about 5, 6, 7 years before his career began getting hot with I took advantage of him. Yeah, he played an extra in one of mine where he went up to an elevator and waiting for the elevator. He was supposed to be chatting with the girl. Meantime, there's action taking place in the foreground. And he just stood there like a lump of clay. And I cut, what a patient. Supposed to be talking with the girl. Come on, you're the prize director. You know better than that. Oh, I'm sorry. But then you couldn't stop him. He was a great guy. He really was a wonderful guy.
You were just, while we were disconnected, Elliot was just doing a little impression of Dick's laughter. Because we all remember that Dick has entered the room.
Yeah. He did have a huge laugh. Yeah, he really did.
You actually spoke to Dick shortly before he passed?
Yes, because he had called me. I don't know why, out of the blue, suddenly he called me a couple of times. We had lunch together and talked about many of the things that we've talked about here. And then we thought it might be fun to do a piece together on some basis. And I had something I wanted to try with him, and he seemed right. And we were going to talk further about it. And the week that we were going to talk about it was, poor guy died.
All right, the episodes are Reluctant Vampire, a great episode.
Which one?
Reluctant
Vampire.
Oh, yeah.
It was Malcolm McDowell about a vampire who doesn't want to be a vampire, so he works in a blood bank.
Yeah.
A great idea. Well-Cooked Hams.
Kevin McCarthy?
That was Curiosity Killed. Well-Cooked Hams was Martin Sheen and Billy Zane. And then Curiosity Killed was Kevin McCarthy, Margot Kidder.
Right.
And then the last one was Surprise Party.
Surprise Party. Who was in that one?
I think Jake Busey.
So long ago.
Yeah.
A little while ago, yeah.
Yeah. Another feature film that you did called The Car.
Yes.
Do you see doing horror as differently than you see doing anything else? Does telling a horror story require other skills?
I was broke, and an executive for whom I had done a favor called me and asked me if I would do this. Well, it was a mess when I first looked at it. So I tried to set it right and made it right in terms of being able to shoot it.
A lot of people like that movie a lot.
I understand that, and I can't really figure it. I like scenes in it because it was a compilation of scenes, one horror scene after another.
Yeah.
That's what my judgment, which was wrong. The major question there was, you're going to reveal the figure of the devil behind the car. And if you remember the movie, you never saw that. And I didn't want to see it because I didn't want to reveal what the devil looked like.
Yeah.
I may have been wrong. I don't know. I look back now and I think maybe I was wrong because I could have made a hell of a lot more of it.
Well, at least now in retrospect, you can go back and think of which studio executive would have been the best depiction of that horror. Was it this one? Was it this one? Was it this one? Maybe all three or four.
Well, actually, I don't think they're actually as mean as they are cowardly.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with you.
They just don't know. And so the attempt to present an authoritative figure, they come off as mean.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know which way to turn. It's Alice in Wonderland.
You know, when we worked with Elliot on Tales from the Crypt, and we didn't have the advantage of working on all those movies that he made before that, you realize you had somebody who was a storyteller, and his goal and interest was really good storytelling. And anything that got in the way of that was something that was distasteful to him, and he would react to it that way, which was the way you wanted somebody to work, because the way we collaborate with each other, and sometimes we're in each other's faces, and sometimes we're arguing. It's all if it's in the interest of good storytelling, nobody really minds the confrontation.
I want to, since you entered that thesis, I want to discuss something with you. I'm going to embarrass you. There are a few producers around who do really the correct thing. They can argue you right up against the wall to force you to be sure that you've covered all the bases. This is one sitting next to me now. Secondly, his ideas were born of the material, not of their fear of something else, which is what I had, the guy I told you about that was talking about what would happen if I did something.
Well, thanks for saying that, but it's true. I mean, when you have an opportunity to work with somebody like Elliot, as we did on numerous occasions, not just one, you know, I very selfishly want to learn from that. And I did. And during the course of that learning, we made good shows together and ultimately came out with a friendship.
Indeed.
Which has lasted all these years.
That's right.
I don't think most working directors today, know or fully understand and are grateful to what Elliot did as an executive on their behalf at the DGA.
Oh, gosh, yes.
I mean, in terms of rights and in terms of cuts and in terms of just the work ethic of being a director.
Yeah.
That sort of goes by the wayside. People don't really hear or see that much. And I think your reference to that interview, plus my comment about, you know, what I know about what he's done for the DGA is quite exceptional. And it's really quite exceptional considering he wasn't an executive. He wasn't an administrator. He was a working full-time director in his own right. And yet he found time to figure out and help those that didn't have the capability that he had and didn't have the opportunity that he had.
Gosh, yes. And
the DGA,
creative rights. And
the DGA has been forever better for that.
You know, it's funny. We're looking at a potential strike across a bunch of the guilds coming up in the next couple of months. But you know, the DGA was always way stronger. Has always been far stronger than the Writers Guild.
Yeah. The answer to that is, if push comes to shove, the poor writers get stomped on a lot.
Yes, we do.
Psychoneurotic.
But going back to the Directors Guild, I mean, the architect who had a lot to do with the changes to benefit the life of the director, both economically and creatively, is sitting to my right.
Indeed.
Thank you.
If not for your efforts, if not for your willingness, just hey, look, because you cared, because it mattered to you, and you always had tremendous integrity.
Well, nice to hear that. My God.
It's a fact of life. I mean, my God, you are nothing but integrity.
That's nice to hear that. That's really nice.
Truer words were never spoke.
On my gravestone, I'll say that, but
a big eye for integrity. But hey, man, it's in this fucking world, integrity is very hard to come by. And so when you bump into integrity and a person with integrity, you wow, you're like a beacon, man.
You know that wonderful story about from what's his name, the director, John Huston.
Oh, sure.
He delivered a cut to his producer for the one of the movies that he did here, and the producer had something to say. I ran up to him, told him it didn't matter what it was. He said something. Oh, really? Houston started all over. You know that story?
No.
He redid it again. Did it again exactly the same way. And the guy said, no, that wasn't right. No, just oh, really? Well, we'll do it again. And they did it again. The official count is something like 8 or 9 times. Not one change was made. He didn't make one single thing. And eventually the poor producer gave up in despair. Well, it wasn't amazing.
That's our friend Elliot Silverstein. See you next time, everyone. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz, by Gil Adler, and by Jason Stein. Our artwork was done by the amazing Jody Webster, and Jason Jody, along with Mando, are all the hosts of the fun and informative Dads from the Crypt podcast. Follow them for what my old pal the Crypt Keeper would have called terrific crypt content.